back. Hour number 2 of Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa, science advisor Matt Moniz, and Stephanie Burke. And we are talking about the paranormal, as we do each and every Saturday night. We'll get right back into it with our guest Lyle Blackburn in just a moment, talking about the Boggy Creek monster. But Stephanie, I just want to throw it out there for people so that we don't forget to tell them later, but we filmed a very interesting television experience the other day.
We did.
We did not sign NDA, so we can talk about it.
Right.
We basically shared some of our experiences at the Fearing Tavern in Wareham.
We did.
And it was a great shoot, I thought.
I think we had a good time.
It helps that our favorite cameraman of all time was our favorite director.
That was a lucky break.
It was.
I liked that.
So,
that made it a lot easier and more fun. But
anytime we can work with Aaron Cadju, it's not like work at all.
No, absolutely not. And he puts up with me, so it's perfect.
Although he was getting pretty, he's getting pretty bossy a little bit there toward the end. He's like, all right, do this a third time, do this a fourth time, come on. But
I'm so used to that, though.
He always apologizes.
Because I worked on the commercials for the Bridgewater Triangle documentary with him, and he's extremely understanding when I forgot my lines.
I didn't have lines when I filmed with him because it was just me telling a story.
Well, I did a commercial, so
but
yeah.
I didn't have to worry about that. But, when we filmed that, it was kind of like a one-take thing, just tell your story and go on. And this, I was noticing he was getting really creative with some of the stuff that we were trying. And,
he was.
And what's best about it is I love it whenever we film something and they take our suggestions for things. Which
is awesome.
It might not end up in the final thing, but at least they're willing to try it.
Our input was in there, and I do have to say that he definitely made you redo all of your stuff way more than he made me redo mine.
Well, that's because he had to get 3 or 4 angles on mine to try to make me look less disgusting on TV.
Stop that.
So, with you, you're all set. It's like, we can just film you. All right, you're good. And then Tim was like, oh, jeez. Oh, that nose looks huge in profile. We can't use this shot.
You definitely come across much more put together than I do. For sure.
If only I didn't have a face for radio.
We're both sitting here on the radio, just FYI.
Yeah, but you can use your face other places. This is pretty much it for me.
Oh, my God.
All right, well, we're going to get back into it with our guest, Lyle Blackburn. We're talking about the Boggy Creek Monster, and you can check out both his original book and the new one, Beyond Boggy Creek. You can get them from his website, lyleblackburn.com, which has all the information about him, all the different things that he's been involved with as well. And I highly recommend going to the website while we're having this discussion. We'll try and cover as much of these topics as we can during the night. But I think, Lyle, it's good if we kind of give people a little bit of background, especially for those who might not have seen the movie. And as I mentioned, I saw it a long time ago. But what exactly is the Boggy Creek monster story, the Fouke monster story?
Well, it kind of came to the attention of the public in May of 1971, and that was when some people had moved to this small town called Fouke, Arkansas, which is in the southwest corner, kind of a swampier area of Arkansas. And they reported that a creature fitting the description, roughly 7 feet tall, covered in hair, walked, on 2 legs. We see that now, obviously, as a Bigfoot-like description, but at the time, back in 1971, that really wasn't on the consciousness. It was just there was some kind of a unknown creature, a monster, stalking around their home for a period of about a week, and then finally it got up on the porch and was, apparently trying to get in the house, and the men confronted it, and it ran into the wood line, and they took some shots at it with a shotgun, and as they went out to investigate to see if they had hit it, one of the guys, by the name of Bobby Ford, got very spooked and said, I'm headed back up to the house. So he started walking up there, and as he was, something came around from the side of the house and attacked him. He tussled with it and managed to get away and get through the door. But he was in severe shock. He was, injured, and he ended up in the Texarkana hospital, and basically telling the doctors he had been attacked by a huge hairy monster. And so at that point, it got in the newspapers, at which time it was followed by a few other sightings by some other credible locals. And as the newspapers kind of descended on it and created the name the Fouke Monster, they discovered that actually there had been reports in the area going back many, many years. And a lot of the locals had had reports and encounters of it back in the 1960s and on back. And all that started appearing in the Texarkana Gazette newspaper. And there was a wannabe filmmaker by the name of Charles B. Pierce who was living in Texarkana and reading all these accounts. And he thought, man, this would make a great documentary or something, So he had the wherewithal to borrow some money, get a camera and a crew, and go down there to Fouke, which is about 20 minutes from Texarkana, out in the woods, and started interviewing these people and sort of doing recreations of their sightings. And that became the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek, which, like we mentioned, was released in 1972. Was basically an independent production by a first-time director out of Arkansas. Hollywood didn't want anything to do with any such thing, but he ended up doing what's called four-walling, and that's showing the movie himself by renting theaters in Texarkana and Shreveport. The movie was so huge because of the awareness of the Fouke monster there that the next year in 73 it was picked up by a movie distributor and then put into wide circulation on the drive-in and movie circuits. And the movie was just huge. I mean, it made $25 million eventually and made the Boggy Creek story extremely famous. And so people come up to me, constantly when I'm at a book signing or an event or something and say, man, that movie, it scared the blank out of me when I was a kid. So many people had seen the movie. So that's basically it. And when I started doing the research to kind of sort out, the backstory, all the sightings, and, had there been sightings since the 70s, of which I found out there had been many. So it was a continuing story. It's just that the media had moved on, and the movie did its thing in the 70s. So there had been sightings, and there's still sightings today that I investigate that go, is just as compelling. And the history of the creature goes back, nearly 100 years in that area of sightings. So it's a very extensive, case that when you go up to there and talk to the local and do like I've done for years and gone back and investigated it, you realize how big the scope is. And so it's, one of those great southern mysteries, that a Bigfoot could be living down there in southern Arkansas.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that it had gone back 100 years. So these stories of sightings of a similar creature in like the 1850s, that can be kind of related to these same sightings?
Yeah, I mean, you do have newspaper articles. There's one, for example, from more of the North Arkansas Ozarks area from 1851, which has a description of a creature like that. And then in the general area, I could date specifically in the Fouke area. I've got one that dates back to around 1908. That would be the earliest sort of mention of it in that area. Then another sighting in around 1916 that's, fairly well accounted for. And of course, as you go forward in time from there, you get more sightings and more, modern recollections of it. So, yeah, it's definitely something that, just didn't pop out of nowhere.
So, and there wasn't like a break in sightings. It seems like, there's been consistent reports. Obviously, as it gains popularity, it becomes more in the forefront of people's minds. But this isn't something that came in waves. This was something that there was always kind of this underlying, every once in a while, somebody had a sighting.
Yeah, definitely. There just seems to be a consistency, and then kind of as you're going back and backtracking these, this happened when the newspapers were very interested in it in 1971. People say, well, hey, back in 1940, I remember talking to a woman who said that she had seen some sort of a man-like creature from the porch of her home. So, nobody had ever asked. So these older sightings just simply had never been mentioned in a public forum. So even today, people in the area often reserve to just, spill everything they know. But as they've gotten to know me and realize that I treat the subject seriously, people say, yeah, you should talk to my uncle. He said he'd talk to you, and then all of a sudden here's another startling account of something this guy might have seen in the 50s, or for example. And, I'm just astounded by, even the credibility of the reports as well as the consistency of which they've taken place.
But what's different about the Ford sighting, and I think it's actually kind of different from a lot of cryptid sightings, is there was actually physical contact. I mean, this creature attacked these people.
Right. Yeah, that was one reason it just blew the doors off of it, because you had some significant and startling details, not just the sighting, or not just sort of it ran across the road, which is spooky enough, but that it had been around the house for several days and then it attacked Bobby Ford. That just made it all the more tantalizing, I suppose. And that's in the Legend of Boggy Creek movie. The Ford incident is sort of the climax of that movie. And while it is definitely ramped up and, made very dramatic, essentially what you see there is what those people reported. And, so it's definitely a cryptid case where there was a lot more contact.
Another question from the chat room is, with these reports coming out over the years and over time, how much of this is actual creature versus misidentification versus mass suggestion, hypnosis, hallucination, whatever else? So you have this legend that's kind of developed. So how do you filter out what is somebody who actually had a legitimate sighting, and how much of it is just somebody who saw something else and said, well, it must be the Boggy Creek monster, obviously?
Well, I just simply toss out all the ones where I think that it was, misidentification, or, it was shadowy, or they didn't see it well. There's plenty of good ones, plenty of those where the individual saw it well enough that it, it's hard to explain. And a lot of these witnesses, because I've written a couple of books on it, obviously some of these witnesses I've gotten to know over the years, and that strengthens the case for me, because again, they're not just people I talked to once on the phone. They're people that I realize are, truthful individuals. They're people who their story hasn't changed. So those are the ones where, when you're reading my books or you're watching our documentary Boggy Creek Monster, those are the folks that I'm recounting their incidents. The other, and there's not a lot of them, but the other ones where I thought that, it's not really solid, those are just not on the record.
I mean, I think anybody that investigates unusual claims of any kind, they have to have some kind of a built-in BS meter. And for some people, it is, instantaneous. You kind of get a feeling right away when you're hearing that initial report from somebody and seeing the way that they reacted, telling you the story, that right away if they're genuine or not. And some people, it's kind of more of a, over time, I'll figure this out for myself. I'm willing to listen, but let's just see where it goes. Do you consider yourself kind of somebody who you can kind of tell from the outset whether or not somebody's pulling your leg, or somebody's just trying to be special by having a sighting, and you can kind of filter those people out early on?
Yeah, I think, I'd like to think that I'm able to detect that, and I certainly feel like that I do. And one reason I think that I can, it's to me, it's okay if it wasn't the Fountain Monster. I don't have to. I feel that a lot of times we're too wanting to have another story that, we're willing to overlook some discrepancies in people's stories, or some, gut feeling that they're not telling the truth. It's okay if it wasn't, because I do have plenty of them, and sort of the best of the best that I feel like are good, solid sightings. So that way I can dismiss those, and I usually find the ones that are, and there's even people who go, I saw, 2 or 3, and I saw it's always and more and more and more. Those are revealed usually early on. You can tell the ones that are like, no, this sounds too good to be true. And it's usually the ones that are reluctant to tell their story. I find that often are the best witnesses, because they're very, traumatized by what they had seen. they don't want to see a Bigfoot. They saw something that's unexplainable, and I'm sort of a counselor to tell them that, hey, you're not the only one that saw this,
I think it all kind of depends, too, on where you envision yourself as a researcher, because you can be just as much a researcher and a chronicler of the legend as you are of the actual physical being. I mean, if it turned out that there never actually was, because as far as I know, there's been no testable materials in relation to this creature, right?
Well, there's some footprints that have been found that are fairly promising. But yes, no, there's no high def photo. There's no piece of DNA or anything. No.
So then, for you, if it turned out that in the end, it turns out that for all this time you've just been chasing and chronicling a legend. I mean, I think that can be just as satisfying as if there isn't an actual creature, and that there's just this story and this imprint in people's minds in the area. And I find that to be just as interesting. I know other people might feel the same way. You might not feel the same way, but I think that that's almost just as cool as thinking that there's an actual physical flesh and blood creature out there, is that enough people thought that there was, that this became an entity unto itself.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think the story is fascinating whether we end up proving it or not. I mean, that's the thing. It's not all about the end game of, well, I've got to convince people this is real and we've got to prove it. This is a fascinating case, and no matter what direction it takes. And certainly that comes out as well in the Small Towns Monsters movies. These are about small towns. They're not necessarily about the monsters, about the effects that these cases have had upon people. And so I both Seth and I had sort of both been fascinated with that angle, that it's, what happened to the town of Falk after this movie came out? What is the story? And so, for me, it's fascinating no matter what. It makes a great story.
And that's what I love, is I love when a story takes on a life unto itself, and when it becomes something that people are not only the ones who are willing to believe it and willing to accept it at face value, but the ones who don't accept it and still become part of it. And I'm sure that you've had some sightings over time of people who, had previously crapped all over the idea of there being a Boggy Creek monster until it happened to them.
Yeah, there's definitely been a few of those. And again, I like those because that they're not, sort of wanting to see the creature. They're starting in a neutral position, and in fact, maybe less than neutral. They're like not going to interpret things as that. It's going to have to be something dramatic, something very legitimate for them to change their mind. And those are the ones that I think say the most about the credibility and the possibility that the creatures could exist, because most people are in that, it's a lot of nonsense. But when you have somebody else who thought that as well, who changed their mind, then people start going, well, maybe something to that. So I think it says a lot about the case.
I do think, too, that when you have people who are, not even the ones who are skeptical, but just the ones that it doesn't even enter their consciousness. Somebody who it was something they didn't even pay attention to, and then they have this sighting, and then they find out about this legend, and they didn't even realize previously that it existed. Those are always the fascinating cases too. It does take a little bit of discernment to be able to tell if they're telling the truth about that or not. But there's always those people who, like, I didn't even know about this. Like when somebody first stumbles upon a legend that they had no idea even existed. To me, that's always fascinating, because that's kind of how it all starts to begin with.
Right, yeah, and then, it opens up a new door of, I've seen that where people had a complete disinterest in this until something happened, and not just in the Boggy Creek case, but, Southern Sasquatch cases all throughout the South, where something significant happened, and suddenly they themselves want to research this and find out more about it, because they're suddenly on the inside of the mystery. So, those are fascinating witnesses, because you've seen this just 180 turnaround in their life, so that something had to have happened.
Well, we do have a call on the line, and if anybody wants to call in with any questions for our guest, Lyle Blackburn, the number is 508-996-0500, toll-free 877-996-1420. So let's take this call. Good evening. You're on Spooky South Coast with Lyle Blackburn. Hello, are you there?
Hello.
Hi, do you have a question for our guest?
Yeah, about 6 years ago, I watched a movie at a friend's house, and it was supposedly based on fact. Richard Gere was the main guy,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it was somewhere in like Virginia or Pennsylvania. It was a river town, and he started having weird things happening electrically around his house and on his phone lines. And one night, when him and his wife were on their way to go somewhere, who happened to be pregnant, he claimed, well, the person that Richard Gere played the part of, claimed that some kind of like heavy ghost-like thing attacked his car, which caused the accident. And a few years later, when he returned to the town, to the house, there was a few more deaths related to it, and he finally left the town. Did you ever see that movie or hear anything about that? Because they said it was based on a true fact.
I'm thinking you're probably pretty familiar with it, Lyle.
Yeah, you're probably going to have to reiterate that because I couldn't hear him well enough.
He was mentioning the Mothman Prophecies film.
Oh, okay.
And about some of that story is true. Some of that in the film. Some of it's true, based on true events, and some of it's kind of fictionalized as well.
Right. Yeah, that's the Mothman Prophecies, which was inspired by John Keel's book of the same name. And in that case, Hollywood kind of did their own.
Okay, I'll jump off the line so I can listen to you guys. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's the problem with that, is that they take a true story and they kind of add some of their own elements to it.
Right. That's a definite case of where, completely different than the Legend of Boggy Creek, where that's a spin. It's a well done movie because it's kind of a different approach. The Mothman is sort of the background to this weird thing. They don't literally show you the monster, so to speak. So a well done movie, but yeah, certainly. If you wanted to follow up on the Mothman, you need to go read. Start with the Mothman Prophecies book, or read like Warren Coleman's accounts of those stories, and coming up, you will want to see the Small Town Monsters movie, The Mothman of Point Pleasant, which we kind of tell the history of the major incidents that happened in 1966 and 67.
And you had mentioned before, especially with the Small Town Monsters series, and we just had Seth on a few weeks ago talking about Mothman, and talking about the fact that these towns, it becomes almost like an unwanted part of their identity that eventually they either choose to try to compartmentalize or they completely and fully embrace. Has the area of the Fouke Monster, has that embraced this story, or is it something that they still kind of, it's kind of like, yeah, we wish people wouldn't keep telling that story?
Well, there's always, some people in the town that wish it would go away or think it's nonsense, and you've got certain people that say, hey, it is what it is, let's make the best of it. Fouke itself has kind of had ups and downs. I mean, when the movie came out in the 70s, the town was literally overrun with people. You can imagine. It's a hit movie, and it was the town's population was like 500 people, and there could be 500 hunters coming down there hunting that thing. So they weren't real thrilled with that, but some of the entrepreneurs, made souvenirs, and the local cafes sold a bunch of stuff, and they were like, hey, this is great. And in recent years, when I started researching my book, which started around 2009, there was barely anything to be seen up there. You went to the town, you're like, this is it? Where's, I want to see a Bigfoot statue or something. There was just nothing. But following the release of my book in 2012, and then subsequently the TV shows Monsters and Mysteries in America, and then the one we did on Finding Bigfoot, it kind of gave a resurgence. And now when you go there, there's a store called the Monster Mart, which has this facade on the front of this giant Bigfoot. It's like the coolest convenience store you've ever seen if you're into monsters or cryptids. And so it's definitely embraced it now. We've done a Boggy Creek festival there a few times, and for the most part, the town feels like, hey, this is part of our history. Whether you believe it or not, it's a part of what we do. And certainly with Point Pleasant, where the Mothman case took place, they've also really embraced it. I mean, the Mothman Festival draws like 12,000 people or something. So, make the best of it, and it gives us tourists something to see when they go there.
But if we look back at it, too, you look at the original Mothman sightings, you look at, the original Boggy Creek sightings and going back all this time and the way that those sightings had filtered in. I mean, you're talking mostly about eyewitness stuff. Obviously, Patterson Gimlin, you have this piece of film, but you're talking a lot about eyewitness reports for these creatures. And I know that you've been following up with the first book and with this book as well with the more modern sightings of the Boggy Creek monster. How have the reports that come in to researchers changed over the years? Is it, I'm sure you're still getting a lot of eyewitness reports, but you're probably also getting people who are like, I saw something weird on my trail cam. I caught this video on my cell phone. We're becoming a more technological society. Is that helping or hurting some of the reports that are coming in about creatures?
I think it helps. I mean, it certainly helps people to be more in touch with a researcher such as myself. I mean, I'm associated with Boggy Creek, so people can, more easily find me and convey messages on email or through Facebook, or, send me pictures on the phone, text things. So you really get that quick update on if anybody has anything they feel is good to offer. So technology helps in facilitating reports. I don't always have to, go to that town myself and, start knocking on doors. Things will come, but, certainly it does create the possibility of, hoaxed footage or a bunch of nonsense that, because of technology, you have to weed through. I've got to go watch YouTube videos or whatever and try to determine if they're real. But, it is what it is. So I think it definitely helps in at least fielding reports or getting leads.
I mean, it's tough, too, because a lot of people who are good at it, who are good at things like Photoshop and things like that, you can create better effects on the phone in your pocket than Spielberg had the opportunity to create with some of his films. So it's becoming harder and harder to look at something and take it for face value, too.
Yeah, and that for that fact, just as far as what kind of things you're getting, certainly they're to be suspect because the technology is there. And that's why I think that at this point, even if there is a really, really clear picture, people are still going to say, nah, that I'm not so sure. And it's understandable because unless there's a body, laying here where we can say, hey, there's no debate about it, there's always going to be that element of suspicion by scientists and anybody else because there's been so many hoaxes, so much nonsense, that at this point, it's like put it on the table or it's going to remain a mystery.
And the hoaxing, I think, is the biggest, because what ends up happening is no matter how great the report might be that comes in and how great the story and the legend might be that gets out there into the public consciousness, it just takes one hoax that gets proven to be a hoax before everybody's just like, well, none of these stories are true then. Obviously, because this was just a Bigfoot suit in a freezer, a Halloween costume in a freezer. That means every Bigfoot sighting is wrong. And so that, I think, is terrible unto itself, and it's hard to kind of combat working as an individual researcher. There's a question in the chat room that mentions MUFON being an organization that works together for ufology, and I know, Moniz, you can probably say that MUFON doesn't always work together so well either.
I can definitely verify that.
Which
yes,
we know. But is there an organization for cryptid researchers of like-minded people that are able to come together, or is it kind of just like a loose affiliation network?
A lot of it is a loose affiliation, but I mean there's a group, the International Cryptozoology Society, which would be sort of a place where you can find reputable members, and would be a place that I would consider. It doesn't have the sort of organization motivation that MUFON has, for example, but it is something that you can be rest assured of, that the information passed around within that group would be good stuff. But yeah, in general, yeah, it's just a lot of loose organizations. That's the thing. I've seen so many Bigfoot research groups pop up. I mean, there's a new one on Facebook every day. And, back in the day, there was, just a handful, that, you could feel confident that their work was good. And now there's so many, you can't tell what's what. And that's been a problem with just flooding the internet with just all kinds of chatter and people who haven't done their homework sometimes posting, rehashing things that have been proven to be a hoax or weeded out years and years ago. It's like, hey, this is something that's, we know this is done and over. But, that since there's no one single group, you just have to kind of, it's every man for himself.
I'm not even kidding. I saw a paranormal group, a ghost-related group, that actually said they were going to go out and look for the Blair Witch. I was like,
yeah.
You do realize that was completely fictionalized, right? I think, maybe they might have meant the Bell Witch and they just weren't, remembering. I don't know, but still, it's disheartening. It's only a matter of time before somebody starts talking about that great. I don't know if you ever saw that really awesome Bigfoot documentary in the 80s that proved that Bigfoot was real, Harry and the Hendersons.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That documentary, yeah, that was a good one. Didn't they have like one in the house or something?
Oh, yeah, it was amazing. And he was so nice and lovable and kind. And
he was really. He's not like one of those Southern Bigfoots. He is one of them friendly ones.
The only mystery related to that movie is what happened to John Lithgow's career as a movie star after that. Playing second banana to Bigfoot kind of knocked him down a few pegs. But
all right,
what pardon me. One of the questions that came up in the chat room is somebody asked if you have kind of made up your mind about the Boggy Creek monster, if you think that this is a flesh and blood creature that can be discovered, or if you think that it is just kind of a legend that you are helping to keep chronicling. Do you expect that somewhere out there really is an actual physical Boggy Creek monster?
Yeah, I do. I think I tend to think that more often than other thoughts. I try to remain well balanced and open minded and not make assumptions I can't back up. And a lot of times, just the minute I get disheartened and think, this is just, I don't know. Suddenly, I'll get a witness report, or I'll experience something strange or something that reminds me that there is something to this. And in most all cases, I can tell you that something took place. These people didn't make these things up. In some cases, people have very close sightings that I just cannot explain. And I can't tell you exactly what the nature of that creature is or what that entity was they saw, but I can tell you they saw something that wasn't a person in a suit, it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a shadow, and they didn't make it up. So I think there's something to it, and I sort of operate with the theory that it is some flesh and blood animal until there's proof otherwise. So I think there's something to it, and it keeps me anticipating that just any day somebody will come up with the photo or the body or whatever else, and it's going to be proven.
Well, I know that you just said that you can't be sure of what it is that they saw, but do you have kind of a working theory in your mind of what these creatures could be? I mean, and I'm not talking about, 9 times out of 10 it's a bear. I'm saying, do you have an idea that if this Fouke monster is real, what kind of a classification we could be looking at?
I think some sort of unknown primate. That's kind of where I always started in cryptozoology and still remain. That it sounds impossible, improbable, yet it's not out of the question that some sort of, above average intelligence type primates have, hidden away in the bottomlands and the mountains of this country and are the ones responsible for the sightings. And that it will turn out to be simply that, a biological creature. And, like I said, in some ways it may turn out to be 6 feet tall, 5 feet tall. Maybe it's the startled, the witnesses are startled, and it could be a little less monstrous than we may imagine. I don't know, but I think that it is some sort of primate.
And that being said, then, do you think a lot of these kind of regionalized creatures, are they all probably interconnected then?
I think so. I think if something, for example, if we want to operate under the theory that, the Gigantopithecus or some large ape had come across the Bering Strait and distributed itself across the pockets of the U.S., they would be of the same, species at one time, but have developed specifically for their environments, so that, what you have in Pacific Northwest is not necessarily exactly the same as what is a skunk ape in Florida, because the environments are so different, and that would explain some of the variations in descriptions and some of the traits, such as some of the wilder ones in the South have been seen walking on all fours at times, and you don't get that as much in the Northwest. But yeah, so I think they would be interconnected and just isolated by their own environment, and therefore have, evolved a bit to be specific.
So the new book is Beyond Boggy Creek, and you can get it from LyleBlackburn.com, and you can also get the original book as well. We also have the Small Town Monsters movie. Now that one has already been released?
Yes, the Boggy Creek Monster came out last November, so that's, you can see that on streaming on Amazon, on Vimeo. It's also going to be hitting some new formats too, and if you are a connoisseur of these type of things, you can of course purchase the DVD from through my website or through Small Town Monsters.
And it's and as we've talked about with Seth before, it's it's going to be an ongoing film series, so it's a great thing to start collecting. So you can add that to your shelf and put that up there with all your other monster movies. And if you're somebody like me that likes to, kind of keep the true stories mixed in with the fictional stories, that they make a nice. And it's always great when somebody comes over and says, "Oh, what's this? What's this all? I've never seen this movie." That's because it's a documentary. That's because it's the true story. And the next thing you know, you're telling them all about this, and then all about the next creature, and all about that. So what else do you have coming down the pike? What's coming up next for you?
Well, I've been just doing a lot of promoting of the stuff. We're working on the Mothman film. A lot of stuff coming up with just some appearances. I'll be at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference next month in May, and then a lot of appearances in the fall at the Mothman Festival and International Bigfoot Conference in Washington. So just a lot of travel, and in between that, just investigating, reports of creatures and carrying forward with documenting and following these fascinating cases.
Well, we certainly look forward to following more of your work as well, and we thank you for joining us tonight, Lyle Blackburn. You can go to his website, LyleBlackburn.com, if you want to find out more, and we have it linked up on SpookySouthCoast.com as well. That's where you can get the books, you can get the DVD, you can find out more about everything that's coming up and see links to all the upcoming events that Lyle will be at as well. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Definitely. I appreciate you having me on.
All right, you have a great night, and we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good.
All right, that is Lyle Blackburn. Again, LyleBlackburn.com is the website. I wanted to kind of make sure that we didn't miss the chance to cover this topic before the end of the night. We only have about 8 minutes left in the show. Excuse me, it's better if I cough than keep trying to talk through whatever that was, whatever that sound was. But I want to make sure that we did get to the story before the end of the show. Ross sent this in to us a little bit earlier. And I'm going to I'm going to try and read this as fast as I can. This comes from the Associated Press. A self-described psychic who scammed more than $1 million in cash and valuables from a dozen people she promised to protect from dark forces has been sentenced to 8 years in prison. An Ohio judge gave 42-year-old Gina Miller the maximum sentence and ordered her to repay $1.4 million. Before her Thursday sentencing in Plainsville, Miller apologized and asked Judge Vincent Collada for leniency so she could care for her two sons, including one she says has a mental illness. Quite simply, you don't deserve leniency, Collada said. You deserve to be punished. Defense attorney Louis Carlozzi said Miller's fortune-telling was part of her Romani culture, and she, quote, took it as a step too far. But prosecutors described Miller as a con artist. An audio tape from a former client who had worn a wire for Mentor police was played in court, and the woman can be heard asking Miller what would happen if she could not make payments. This is a direct quote. Your grandson would die, Miller responds. Miller pleaded guilty in March to an aggravated theft charge, and the scheme prosecutors say operated for 15 years. They say she targeted vulnerable clients, convincing them to pay her in cars, Rolex watches, and a diamond ring in exchange for protection. Another former customer, a 72-year-old woman, told the judge she works 2 jobs to pay off credit card debt after giving money to Miller. She has ruined my life, the woman said. I cannot live long enough to pay off the debt. On recordings of meetings between Miller and an undercover agent also played in court, Miller can be heard asking for $180 for crystals to improve the agent's luck. Stephanie Burke.
Hi.
As the person who does this, and as a person who is, as far as I can tell, not Romani culture.
No.
I don't think I know anything about that, about you having any of those.
No. I'm not a gypsy.
So what was that quote again? She took it a step too far. I don't think it has anything to do with her Romani culture that she made it a step too far.
No, I think that's just gross to blame it on the culture. I think she's just a jerk. I'm trying my best to censor what I'm feeling.
This is what I can't wrap my head around. Because we've talked about it in the past.
Right.
We know that there are people out there who are fraudulent.
Absolutely.
Who claim to have psychic and mediumship gifts.
Mm-hmm.
We know that there are some people who... We've talked about this recently. You know, there's people who don't even realize sometimes that they're fraudulent. Some people think that they're...
I think there's truly people out there that believe that they have some sort of gift and they're just taking people's money for it.
Or as we've talked about in the past, that sometimes people might have a little bit of a gift that they just... They fill in the blanks themselves with their own beliefs.
Absolutely. I compare that to, if anybody's ever seen those old school episodes of American Idol, when the people come on and they think that they're the greatest singer on the planet and they're shot down by professionals and they can't understand why. It's the same mentality. But this is totally different. This is just straight up disgusting.
I mean, how does somebody fall for it to this level? I mean, how does somebody say, okay, this lady says my grandson's going to die if I don't give her a Rolex watch?
Because they're just vulnerable, gullible, lonely. I don't know. I don't understand it because obviously I don't fall for that sort of thing. But there are people out there, especially like, certain cultures believe that, these things do happen. A lot of cultures and a lot of people believe in hexes and curses too. And they will do anything to avoid it. So
a con is a con any way you look at it. It's just that this person's using this particular method to con people.
But like most of the time when somebody ends up becoming a mark for a con artist, like I can kind of see where that plays into, like I can understand how people get wrapped up in some of these schemes, but I don't know how you can get wrapped up. Maybe it's just because I'm fundamentally skeptical of people who have abilities.
The con artist knows.
Though.
See, that's...
A lot of people will literally, and I was just discussing this with somebody the other day, about how if you go to a psychic or a medium, and that's the first and only experience you've ever had, that's what you have to gauge it on. But now you've created trust with that psychic and medium. So you just keep going back to the same one over and over again and believing that that's all that's out there until you meet somebody else that has an actual ability or better ability.
Or what's worse is if somebody actually goes out and say somebody goes and sees somebody that actually does have abilities.
Right.
And that convinces them that it's real. And then this person just happens to be the next person that they go to see.
Right.
And somehow still finds a way to dupe them. So...
But that's my point is, like, do your research. Look around. If something isn't 100% dead on, no pun intended, then, okay, I'll even be fair, 90%. Then don't buy into it. Don't tell me, oh, I just had a friend text me the other day. She went to a house party of someone that I'm aware of. And told me, oh yeah, it was hit or miss. They were like 30% accurate the entire time. Why did you waste your money? Why did you continue to sit there? Why are you sending people to that person? All they're doing is taking your money. Nobody should ever leave any type of reading and say they were only 30% accurate.
Cars, Rolex watches, and a diamond ring.
Mind-boggling.
In exchange for protection. It's one thing
That's
if it's that you're making a connection for them with somebody who's passed on.
Which is even more disgusting. However, this is just plain like, hi, I sell my crystals for like $1 a piece.
Right.
And that's just because...
Well, and apparently she needed 180 crystals for this one person.
Right. I don't even understand that.
So, I mean, maybe she one of those, like, we went into that store where they had some pretty expensive ones. Maybe she just wanted one of those nice ones. Yeah, but,
those are rare and very
well,
large
somebody else
pieces.
to foot the bill for it.
But that's just crazy.
But this isn't just to prey upon grief or whatever. This is to protect them from dark forces.
There's people local that have done that over the past, 5 years that have been caught by the cops. I don't get how they're still in business and how they continue to do these things.
But they're getting
some people are just good at what they do, I guess.
Rolexes, diamond rings, cash. All of a sudden, I'm feeling something's popping into my head right now.
Are you seriously in the wrong profession?
There's somebody out there right now that has a Rolex watch that they are willing to give to me to protect them from dark forces. So
I'm trying my best to be really good right now.
Listen, I have a Rolex watch.
Yep.
And it's as fake as this psychic. But it only cost me $20, and I was glad to pay it.
That is awesome.
All right, well, that does it for this week's show. We do want to make sure that we give away those tickets to the Provincetown Paracon before we go. So we talked about the Boggy Creek Monster tonight with our guest, Lyle Blackburn. We also mentioned earlier in the show that it's the 50th anniversary year of that famous Bigfoot film. So if you can call in, be the first caller to tell us where that was filmed. Tell us where that film, I'm not going to tell you the name of it again, you'll have to look it up, but where was that filmed? 508-996-0500, 877-996-1420. You will be the winner, and you will get a pair of passes to the daytime portion of Provincetown Paracon coming up in a couple of weeks. And speaking of coming up, we will have another show coming up next week. Our guest will be Dr. Scott Kolbaba. We'll be talking about physicians' untold stories. And we'll be back then. Stay spectacular.